I'm Tahir Dhindsa and you're watching SDTV. Global warming is an important thing. Now it is driving climate, and the climate is, it seems that the direction becomes irreversible. Experts say if we do not control it at some point in time, the tipping point must not have been very far away. That is the reason the world has gone haywire to reduce the carbon footprint. But the issue is that there's a lobbies, and second, you need to educate at the level of the communities, because the end user is more important than, it's equally important than the other players in the market. We have today with us Mr. Jonh Zeigler, Director, Urban Education and Community Partnership, DePaul University, Chicago. Very warm welcome.
Thank you.
And with his left is Dr. Ijaz Ahmad. And Dr. Saab, you are expert also in this area and on the carbon footprint and how these policies are, as in at a country which is almost the end user.
Thank you.
So, Doctor, how would you put the situation for what should be the most important step that must be taken now?
I could just speak for the communities that we work in Chicago. I think you brought it up in your introduction, how to inform people in community that this is an issue, right? A lot of my work is steeped in urban development, right? We have crises of violence in some of our spaces. We have other, which you would classify as crises. And so to bring this into a conversation to somebody, in some of the communities we work in, they would not even think this is something that they would even want to talk about. And so how is this an issue? When my child is not getting the proper education, when, there's food deserts where there's not enough, fresh food in our community. Why is this relevant? And I think part of this, at least for me, is to educate community that this is an issue. This impacts everything, right? And so how to tell the story in a way that people on the ground get it, that they see the urgency of it, and how to act. And so it's not just an institution or university that comes in and say, this is how we should do it. Why is it relevant? And why is it relevant to people on the street? Why is it relevant to people in their homes who have, other issues for them to think about, right? And I think that's our challenge, right? That this isn't a hierarchical sort of conversation with intellectuals and professors and researchers, and we understand these things, but how does it trickle down in a way that people really can formulate ideas on the ground and work with these institutions in a way to combat that?
The Israeli writer Jonh Harari, who had written *Sapiens*, he said all these wars are not going on for their territories, because there's enough territory in Gaza. Even so, war is not for territory. It's not for money. It is, the war is for that story that both parties believe. So how to bring forward the story that has support at the grassroots level? How to tell the story? Because I understand that is more, the issue is more close to the narrative than so many other things.
Yeah, and I love that idea of how does one tell the story, because it's not something that you just get some data and you pass it on to somebody, but how does that data begin to tell a story that's relevant to somebody on the street, that's relevant to people in homes, that's relevant to people who are not usually in connection with universities or professors, and I would dare say that part of that is that informing has to be somebody from those communities as well, to be able to articulate the story in a way that's connects to folk that they grew up with, connects to people who live in that community, who connects to people who have that same sort of environmental issue, grew up in those environmental issues, but also look how this connects. And so I think part of that is they respect that voice. They hear that voice differently than me parachuting in with my data. This is what we're going to do. They also hear it differently, right? And then I think thus the conversation begins differently. Then the partnerships, at least from my experience, then the partnerships with institutions become more activated versus bifurcated, right?
I would like to add about the telling the story. I think this is very important because if the story is not told to the relevant stakeholders, ultimately, like it does not have that kind of impact. So for me, I think youth is the best vehicle to use for telling the story and the communities. And that is one of the reasons that our focus remained on youth, so that it is more sustained. It's more relevant because they are the one who are going to face anything related to, say, you mentioned about the climate change or any other aspect related to whether it's a food security, whether it's related to disaster or any geopolitical situation. So if the youth are told the right story in the right way, I think they are going to get involved, and then it will have more impact. And here comes, like the project that actually we are working, focusing on youth from Quaid-e-Azam University, from ComSat, and actually building their capacity, teaching them about issues that are especially focusing on.
So they can tell the stories.
They can understand and then tell it on to the broader.
Do you think your story is winning? I'm asking you from a purpose. One of the stories that I read in my teens, in my early teens, had a very great impact on me. And the writer was Alex Haley, and the book was the famous book, Roots. The Roots. The way he, narrates the story. And the second book was when this on the Civil War, I'm talking about the US, the feudalism was gone and the industrial America was yet to born.
Sure.
And there was a story written on that, and that also had a great impact on when I was growing up. Sure. And that was gone with the wind. So do you think that such big stories, this is the time that climate can, somebody should come up, and do you think this sort of story is winning at least in US?
I do.
With communities?
I wouldn't say gone with the wind, but I would say from my perspective, but I will say that because I work in communities that has been doing similar projects, right, and dealing with urban development and some of the things that we're discussing today, I've seen it start at a very granular level when we're just having conversations. I see where the passion begins to scaffold, right? And I see where it becomes its own engine, right? Where people on the ground who weren't at these tables are now at the tables, and youth, particular because they're able to use social media, they use TikTok, whatever that device is, to communicate that maybe I don't have the expertise, but that begins to tell the story too. And you see more people increasingly at the table, and then you see more people increasingly in these conversations. You're seeing people who want to do something. Now, I would say this, and not to say that this is something that stops at a certain level. I was with an organization that only had 2 people very much passionate about this, right? 4 years later, they just got awarded Jeff Bezos Award for $10 million in the community on the south side of Chicago, which I hope you'll get a chance to visit. But it started with the conversation and the passion, and yes, the story, right? And so I agree, but I think that the process, the story doesn't just stay baked in a corner.
Yes.
The story has to live and it has to grow. And it has to have voice, right? And I think that part of that is one, who's telling the story, and two, how is the story received? And the story can't be told one time. It has to be really shared in a way that
The
communicates.
story can have children. You can have many sequels and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, your story goes on. Dr. Ijaz, do you think Pakistan has stories that can be taken up by the international audience, or Chicago can have that, buy that story and narrate it?
Well, there are definitely different stories, and there are islands of success and wonderful initiatives that have been actually taken on nature resource management, on green urban development, etc. But unfortunately, those stories are limited to few people. They have not been disseminated to that level. And most probably, it is the like priority of maybe media or priority of the decision makers, how to bring it further, how to engage, like those who are good storyteller. So I think these days social media has such an impact that if you do something, like a minute ago in Pakistan, you will be noticed throughout the world. People will know that okay, something has happened, but we have not used the social media for that purpose successfully yet. That is why I think it is important, because youth again is ambassador in this regard, and they know all the like they are more techies than people of our age, because they have good understanding about using the social media. And globally, youth is playing now a very pivotal role. They are, like in every COP, they demonstrate, they actually show their presence. So I think engaging youth is the fundamental thing that we need to look into this. I'll just give you example of mangrove forest. Mangrove forest is success story in Pakistan. In most part of the world, mangrove forests are degrading, but in Pakistan it is increasing. Another good story, Indus dolphin, which is a very endemic to Pakistan. The population of there are four other river dolphins in the world, four other types of river dolphins, and Pakistan has Indus dolphin, and the only population which is increasing is of Indus dolphin. So, and there are many other such good stories. Trophy hunting was another initiative. Similarly, now if you see, like initiatives related to rainwater harvesting, etc., they are actually, like there, but unfortunately, they are not being told to those
In a
audiences.
proper way.
Yes.
So, Dr. John, are you convinced that the fiction of a story, the fiction of the climate, is more important than its facts? If you want to win win the game.
Sure, sure. I'll pose it this way. I look at the glass half full.
All right.
Yeah.
I think we can really focus on what's not working. That's too easy. But I'd like to think about what is working, And one of the things, and this whole thing about young people, and I like to even bring that down a little bit more, young people who are growing up in grade school, right? That there's a lot of projects and books that are now written about climate change, in a way that young people, that youth, are really understanding it more. And how that really fits into curriculum in a way that makes sense, right? At least in the U.S., right? And so the stories becomes now part of becomes part of curriculum that's in some of the schools, and maybe you'll visit a couple of those schools, that there's textbooks or storybooks that is around climate change. It's not saying that it's climate change, but you see how things are happening, and young people are able to ask these questions. And so I think it's starting even younger, at least for us, and in grammar schools, and how they think about it and how they talk about it. And so I think they formulate their own stories then. And what they can do is that they can see what they're reading and what's going on in their own communities, and have these aha moments and like, well, wait a minute, this isn't in the book. And so they can begin to even formulate critical questions themselves.
Right.
And I think at that point, that's where the university comes in to be able to be project-based sort of ideas. Young people from universities comes in and begin to project-based things with young, a grammar school around this,
Right.
So there's all kinds of ways to skin a cat.
Right. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for sparing time, and Dr. Ijaz, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the bottom line is that it's important how we project climate and how it is accepted by the youth. So obviously, the biggest thing is the narrative of the issue that needs to be portrayed, and we should accept that. With this, we come to the end of the program. Bye for now. Yeah.
Did that make sense?
Yeah, it was perfect.